Welcome back to the Linux Weekly News Roundup. It is the first week of July 2026, and in the past 7 days, the Linux ecosystem received what might genuinely be its biggest single opportunity in decades, delivered not by Linux developers, not by a government mandate, and not by Microsoft's own failures, but by Sony and Microsoft together. There is a brand new Linux tablet worth knowing about. Google just lost a $4.1 billion fight in Europe with direct implications for how Android is bundled on devices. SteamOS expanded to all AMD PCs. And the Steam Machine, Valve's long-awaited physical gaming device, got its first real-world reviews, and they are more complicated than anyone hoped. A lot happened. Let us go through all of it. On July 1st, 2026, one day ago as of this recording, Sony announced that physical disc production will end in January 2028 for new games releasing on PlayStation consoles. Games after that date will be digital only. Physical disc games will still work on disc-capable hardware, but no new games will be produced in physical format after January 2028. The same day, Microsoft's Xbox division confirmed an aligned direction. No new physical game releases for Xbox after the same general timeframe. Sony and Microsoft just handed Linux a major win. That is the Linux experiment's framing, and it deserves unpacking because the logic is not immediately obvious. Why does the end of physical media help Linux? The answer is game ownership and platform lock-in. For the last 30 years, one argument against Linux gaming has been that your game library, your disks, your physical collection, only works on specific hardware. You own the disk is yours. If you want to play your disk on a different platform, you need the right hardware. When all games are digital, that argument disappears. You do not own the disk. You own a license, stored in an account on a platform. The disk is gone. My games are tied to this hardware because I own. Physical disks argument is replaced by my games are tied to this platform's license server. And platform license servers can be ported, emulated, or abandoned, as anyone who has watched digital storefronts shut down already knows. The more immediate consequence, as physical media dies, the practical distinction between playing on a PlayStation, an Xbox, or a Valve Steam machine begins to blur. A game sold digitally on Steam can, through Proton, run on Linux. A game sold digitally through Sony's or Microsoft's platforms cannot currently run on Linux, but the infrastructure for cross-platform licensing is being developed. The death of physical media accelerates the conversation about whether platform exclusivity through physical hardware has any remaining justification. 9to5 Linux Weekly Roundup for June 28, 2026 includes news about Steam Machine, Librem 16, KDE Plasma 6.7.1, Cosmic 1.1, DXVK 3.0, SteamOS desktop NVIDIA support, and more. The timing is notable. Console gaming's physical medium is ending at exactly the moment Linux gaming is becoming viable, the Steam Machine is launching, and SteamOS is expanding to new hardware. The opportunity is not that Linux will immediately absorb PlayStation and Xbox players. The platform walls are still up. The opportunity is that my games only work on this device because of physical media is being removed from the equation, making game library portability a live conversation in a way it has not been for a generation of gamers. Juno Computers launches the Juno Tab 4 Wi-Fi Linux-powered tablet with a 2K display, 16GB RAM, an Intel Ultra 5 115U processor, 4 desktop environments, and Debian GNU-powered Linux, or Ubuntu. This is the hardware story of the week for Linux enthusiasts who have been watching the tablet space. Juno Computers, a UK-based Linux hardware vendor, has shipped the Juno Tab 4, and the specifications represent a meaningful step forward for what a purpose-built Linux tablet can be. The hardware: Intel Core Ultra, 5 to 115U processor, 16GB of RAM, a 2K resolution display, Wi-Fi 6E USB 4, and your choice of Debian GNU Linux or Ubuntu as the operating system. 4 desktop environments are supported out of the box: GNOME, KDE Plasma, XFCE, and Cinnamon. The storage options start at 512GB. This is not a compromised Linux tablet trying to make ARM work with missing drivers. The Intel Core Ultra 5 115U is the same processor class used in premium Windows Ultrabooks. It has full Linux kernel support, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, display, touch input, and USB. All work because Intel has invested in Linux driver support for this processor generation in a way that Qualcomm and MediaTek have not historically done for their tablet-oriented chips. The honest context: 16GB of RAM and an Intel Core Ultra 5 115U in a tablet form factor means this is competing in price range with mid to high-end iPad Pros and premium Android tablets. It is not a budget device. The Juno Tab 4 is for the user who specifically wants a Linux tablet with Intel hardware, not a user looking for the cheapest possible tablet. The 4 desktop environment support is more significant than it might appear. A Linux tablet that boots into GNOME gives you a touch-optimized modern interface. One that boots into KDE Plasma gives you the most customizable desktop in Linux. The ability to choose and switch is exactly what differentiates a Linux device from every other tablet on the market. No iPad user can decide their device will run KDE instead of iOS. No Android user can decide their device will run GNOME. The Juno Tab 4 offers genuine operating system flexibility on a device form factor that has never had it in a polished commercial package before. Europe's top court upheld Google's fine of around $4.1 billion, $467 billion, over alleged anti-competitive practices. In 2018, the European Commission fined Google with a record-breaking penalty on the grounds that it abused Android's mobile dominance to give unfair advantage to its own apps via pre-installation deals with smartphone makers. July 2026, Google lost its long-running fight against a record EU antitrust fine for using its Android mobile operating system to block rivals. The court sided with the EU antitrust enforcer. The appeal brought by Google and its parent company Alphabet is dismissed, thereby confirming the penalty imposed for Google Search's abuse of a dominant position in the context of the Android operating system. Let us be precise about what this fine was actually for, because it is easy to misread it as a privacy or security fine. It is an antitrust fine. The European Commission's finding: Google forced phone manufacturers who wanted to use the Android operating system, specifically the licensed version with the Play Store, to also pre-install Google Search and Google Chrome. Manufacturers who wanted to ship competing search engines or browsers as defaults were effectively locked out of the most commercially important Android tier. This is the bundling argument. Microsoft was hit with similar antitrust action in Europe over Internet Explorer bundling in the early 2000s. The remedy there required Microsoft to offer a browser choice screen to European Windows users. Google has already implemented some remedies, including allowing Android users to switch default browsers and search engines, but the fine itself is now confirmed final after 8 years of appeals. A Google spokesperson said, "Android provides more choice for everyone and supports thousands of businesses. This judgment fails to recognize our significant investment to ensure Android remains open, interoperable, and free." Google's argument that Android is open source and free has been the consistent defense throughout the case. The court's response is that the open source nature of Android does not immunize the licensing practices surrounding the Google licensed version, which is what phone manufacturers actually ship on commercial devices. For Google, more fines look likely in the near future for allegedly favoring its own services and products and search results, and for practices related to its App Store, both of which fall under the Digital Markets Act, aimed at reining in the power of big tech. The $4.1 billion fine for Android bundling is the end of a first-stage EU-Google conflict. The Digital Markets Act brings a new enforcement regime that is proactive rather than retrospective. It requires gatekeepers like Google to comply with interoperability and fairness requirements before violations are found, rather than discovering violations through multi-year investigations and then litigating the fine for another 8 years. For the Linux ecosystem specifically, the Android bundling case is relevant because the EU's continued pressure on mobile platform gatekeeping is part of the same regulatory environment that produced France's Linux migration mandate, Germany's digital sovereignty push, and the broader European movement toward open source technology procurement. Every time the EU successfully challenges platform dominance through hardware and software bundling, it creates slightly more space for alternative platforms, including Linux, in markets where those platforms have regulatory allies. Steam Machine looks like a disappointment. That framing is the summary from the Linux Experiments review of the initial Steam Machine reception. Let us be more specific. Valve's Steam Machine is a physical gaming PC shipped with Steam OS pre-installed. It has been anticipated for a long time. The concept of a Valve-built hardware device running Steam OS dates back to the original Steam machines of 2015, which were a commercial failure. The 2026 Steam Machine was expected to be different because Steam OS is genuinely good in 2026, and the Steam Deck proved the concept works. Steam OS desktop NVIDIA support. The Verge's coverage noted that Steam OS desktop mode now supports NVIDIA GPUs, a significant expansion since the Steam Deck and most early Steam OS installs were AMD only. This is relevant for the Steam Machine because many users' existing GPU investments are in NVIDIA hardware. The disappointment framing from the Linux experiment comes from price to performance positioning. The Steam Machine ships at a price point where comparable gaming PCs, even Windows PCs, offer equivalent or better hardware. The argument for a Steam Machine is not raw hardware value. It is the polish of the Steam OS out-of-box experience and Valve's support ecosystem. Whether that premium is worth it depends on how much friction you're willing to accept from a Windows gaming setup compared to Steam OS's console-like simplicity. SteamOS 3.8 image supports all AMD PCs. This is the concurrent news that is more broadly significant than the Steam Machine hardware itself. SteamOS 3.8 is now available as an install image for any AMD-equipped PC. Not just Valve hardware, not just certified handheld devices, but any AMD PC. This means a user with an existing AMD gaming PC can download SteamOS 3.8 and install it, getting the full SteamOS gaming experience on hardware they already own. For context, this is the Steam Machine software without the Steam Machine hardware price. If you have an AMD gaming PC and you want SteamOS's console-like game launch experience, the path is now available through a downloadable image rather than a new hardware purchase. 9 to 5 Linux Weekly Roundup, Cosmic 1.1, KDE Plasma 6.7.1, CachyOS June, ISO, DXVK 3.0, Linux kernel 7.0 EOL, ArcInstall 4.4, NVIDIA 580.173.02. Several smaller but significant updates from the past week. Cosmic 1.1. System76's new desktop environment reached version 1.1. Cosmic, written in Rust and built from scratch for modern Linux desktops, continues to add features with each release. Pop. OS users will be migrating to Cosmic as their primary desktop environment. Version 1.1 adds improvements to Cosmic Files, Cosmic Term, Cosmic Edit, and Cosmic Applets. KDE Plasma 6.7.1, the maintenance release for KDE Plasma 6.7 with bug fixes. KDE Plasma remains one of the most actively developed desktop environments in Linux, with a level of customization that no other operating system, including Windows and Mac OS, matches. Linux kernel 7.0 reached end of life. Users on the 7.0 kernel series are recommended to upgrade to Linux 7.1. Most Linux distributions handle this through their normal update process. This is not an urgent emergency action, but worth noting if you maintain any systems on custom kernels. DXVK 3.0, the Direct3D to Vulkan translation layer used by Proton for running Windows games on Linux, reached version 3.0. DXVK improvements directly affect how well Windows games perform through Proton. Version 3.0 includes significant performance improvements for DirectX 11 titles. NVIDIA 580.173.02 driver, a new stable NVIDIA driver for Linux. The cadence of NVIDIA Linux driver releases has accelerated significantly in 2025 and 2026 compared to previous years, consistent with the broader NVIDIA Linux investment we covered in this channel's recent NVIDIA story. AUR compromised with malware and spam, an important security story for Arch Linux and its derivatives. The Arch user repository had a malware and spam incident. The specific package, an npm campaign that added malicious dependencies, affected users who installed the compromised package before the issue was caught. If you use the AUR and installed packages in the affected window, review your Arch Linux security advisories. The incident is a reminder that the AUR's community-maintained nature requires more trust verification than installing from official distribution repositories. Kali Linux 2026.2, the latest release of the ethical hacking and penetration testing distribution, with Genome 50 and KDE Plasma 6.6 desktop offerings and new security tools. Let me close with a connection across these stories because individually they are news items, and together they are a pattern. Sony and Microsoft ending physical media removes a structural argument against gaming platform alternatives, including Linux. Juno's Tab 4 is the most capable purpose-built Linux tablet hardware available, showing that the Linux hardware ecosystem can produce competitive devices in form factors that have historically been dominated by iOS and Android. Google, losing its $4.1 billion Android bundling fine, confirms that European courts are willing to force changes to how dominant platforms lock users and manufacturers into their ecosystems. The same pressure driving France's Linux migration. SteamOS 3.8 expanding to all AMD PCs means Valve's Linux-based gaming platform is now available to a much larger hardware population without requiring new hardware purchases. DXVK 3.0 and NVIDIA's continued Linux driver investment close the gaming performance gap further. None of these stories individually changes the fundamental competitive landscape of desktop computing. The Windows installed base is still enormous. The application ecosystem still has significant gaps on Linux. The user trust built by 30 years of Windows defaults does not evaporate in a week. But the week of July 1st, 2026 produced a specific cluster of developments spanning gaming, hardware, legal, and software that each chip away at a different reason someone might stay on proprietary platforms rather than move toward Linux. Physical media lock-in, hardware unavailability, platform antitrust enforcement, gaming performance gaps, all of them moved in the same direction in the same week. That does not happen randomly. It happens when an ecosystem has reached a maturity level and a critical mass of institutional support, where developments across different dimensions reinforce each other. This is what the beginning of a platform shift looks like before it is visible in the headline market share numbers. Whether it continues depends on the next 100 weeks as much as the last one, but the first week of July 2026 was a good week for Linux, worth documenting.